If you're still using AIP the same way you were 6 months ago, you may not be using it to the fullest. Let's look at an example to see what's new. For this example, I'm going to use Blueprint, which is our open source UI toolkit. So this has a bunch of different components in here, things like different buttons and forms, different controls that might be useful in building an application. And one of the things that it has is a bunch of issues on GitHub. So this is where people can report bugs or ask questions, things like that. And one of the challenges with a popular open source project is that you end up with many, many issues. And some of these can be duplicates of issues that already exist. So we're going to see how AIP can help us deduplicate some of these issues by building something that can automatically suggest duplicates. So let's go and take a look at an example issue that we might have here. So there's this issue that I found that mentions that the file input has no visual focus state. And this is one that has some details on how to reproduce, but also is closed because it was fixed in a future version. So if someone new comes in and searches for an issue, because let's say they're on an older version and they're seeing the same issue, they might not be able to find it. So for example, if I go in and search for file input focus outline, I'll see some other stuff in here, but this issue doesn't come up. And this is because GitHub search here is doing keyword search. And so unless I figure out the exact right keywords here, it's not going to find the issue that might be relevant for me. So let's see if we can use AIP to do that a bit better. In this case, I've brought in these GitHub issues into a simple pipeline that goes in and extracts out and converts this into an object. So I have a Blueprint GitHub issue object, and I also have a linked set of issue chunks. So these are pieces of that GitHub issue that I've broken down into smaller segments that I've then used an embedding model to create an embedding for. So we'll come back to that and see how that might be relevant in our search later on, but I've created some of these issues, and they look something like this. So I have a series of issues, and they have things like the state or the body, some different URLs for the different parts of whether it's starred or not, things like the assignee, what type of user created it, some comments, a bunch of different fields. So what I want to do is I want to use AIP logic to build an issue deduplicator. So to start, I'm going to take in a parameter of just, let's say, new issue. Right? So as someone creates a new issue, maybe they have some text, I want to be able to go in and say, let's check if that text is already a duplicate of an existing issue. So the way that you might be doing this is you might go ahead and grab that use LLM block, which lets us start using a language model to complete this task. You might put in some instructions, something like, hey, your goal is to identify duplicate GitHub issues. The user will provide a GitHub issue. Use one of these tools, so in this case, maybe the query objects tool, with that GitHub issues object. So in this case, I'm going to bring up that GitHub issue, and then I'm going to pass in that new issue context. And so let's go ahead and run this with some example issues. So I'm going to go ahead and run this with that same example that we had before. So file input, focus, outline. So let's see if that works. So I'll go ahead and run that. And we can see that it actually goes in and is able to define a query for to use. And we get back some results. So in this case, it looks like it found some other issues around file upload, something about focus states, but it's not the issue that we wanted it to find. It didn't really find that issue around no visual focus state. So let's see how we can improve this initial version using some of the new capabilities in AIP. So I'm going to save this on our main branch, and I'm going to take advantage of our first feature here, and I'm going to create a new branch for our v2 version of this. I'm also going to go ahead and add this as a test case so that I can run this a couple more times. And this will create an evaluation suite for me. So I'm going to run this on our initial version just to see how well we perform out of the gate. And then we'll come back to that when we make some changes. So after this runs, I am going to go ahead and switch to the v2 version of this branch. So I'll go ahead and create a v2 version and then start making some changes. So the first change that I want to do is I want to do some of that work to find the relevant issues out of the gate. So we can have the LLM use a tool to do this, but we can also use some of the new tools in AIP to do this. So I'm going to use the semantic search transform to be able to query for the relevant issues deterministically. So we actually save a little bit of back and forth because we know exactly what we want to look up, and we want to get the set of other GitHub issues that are semantically related to the new issue being created. So this uses that embedding that we defined previously. So in this case, I'm going to go in and define what object set I want to pull that from. So maybe I want to pull this from that same blueprint GitHub issue object set. And maybe I want to do some filtering on this first. Maybe I want to go in and say, I want to filter this object set. Maybe I want to start by taking all of those issues and filter to issues where the state is open. So maybe I only want to filter on open issues. So I can specify what my filter criteria is. And another convenient feature here is I can go in and select these and just run this set of features to see, is this working in the way that I expect? So I'll go ahead and run that, and I see, oh, I'm getting 0 blueprint GitHub issues in this result here. So that's a little bit weird, but now I can take a look at the actual debugger and see the objects underneath to see why this might be. So if I open this up or go back to my previous list, I can say, oh, okay, it looks like it might be lowercase here, and I specified uppercase. So I'll switch this to lowercase, rerun it, and I can quickly iterate and say, okay, cool, now it's narrowed to the open GitHub issues instead of showing all of the GitHub issues. So going from this 6,700 down to 742. And I can do that and quickly test even subsets of this workflow. In this case, I think I actually want to work on all GitHub issues. So I'm just going to remove that and search across all GitHub issues. So I want to pick the right properties to search, and semantic search works across our embedding property. But I'll notice that I actually don't have an embedding property over here. And that's because this is on a linked object. So I can go and create a linked object set by using our search around capabilities. So I'm going to start with all of those GitHub issues, and I'm going to navigate to the linked chunk issue. This because one GitHub issue might have several chunks associated with it, depending on how long the GitHub issue is. So in this case, I'm going to navigate to those issue chunks, and I'm going to start using those instead. So instead of using all issues, I'm going to switch to those issue chunks. And I can rename this as I go. Maybe it's a little bit clearer to say linked GitHub issue chunks here. Great. Now I'm going to go in and search on that embedding column that's available on this object. And maybe I want to get the top, let's say, 10 objects. And for the query, this is what I'm actually using to search. And I can put an embedding in here and do that embedding work myself. But because I've told my ontology exactly how to do this embedding by describing the model that's used when I configured this object, I can just put in text here. So in this case, I'm going to put in that new issue text that we're taking in as a parameter. So I can quickly test these 3 blocks and see if those behave the way that I expect. In this case, I actually haven't specified a value. So let me go specify that value that we picked before. So I'm going to pass in that file input focus outline. Great. Run that. All right. Looks like that is, and let me just run these blocks instead of running everything. All right. Looks like that is returning 10 issue chunks, and those are the most related issue chunks. And I already see some promising signs, and this tight iteration loop is really valuable to me here because I can quickly see, ooh, file input has no visual focus state. That is actually that issue that I was looking to, or at least a part of that issue that I was looking to retrieve earlier. So now I have that issue. I know that I can start using this as a building block for the context that I pass in. Getting that right context into the model is super important. So I've done a bunch of different steps here, and as this logic grows in complexity, I want to make sure this file is still manageable. So I'm going to select these and group them into a block. So I'm going to call this relevant issues, and I can actually go ahead and collapse this. So now I can take all of that complexity and kind of group it in here and hide it behind this. I can always go in and expand it and change it, but this makes it a little bit easier to manage as I try and build more and more advanced functions here. So the simplest thing that I can do now is I can go ahead and take this and update my LLM block to, instead of having my LLM do the querying, I can pass it context that I have queried for deterministically. So maybe I will say possible issues here, and I will pass in, instead of passing in, asking it to query for it, I will pass in the issues. But I see the first issue. I'm actually not working with issues here, I'm working with chunks. And so before I pass this in, what I want to do is I want to go back to that block and do one more search around. I want to pivot back from my discovered relevant chunks into the objects that are relevant here. So now when I go and reference that, I see, okay, cool, I'm working with my object again. So I have all the richness of the ontology that I expect and want to use. So in this case, I'm going to go and pick some subset of the properties here, just the ones that are relevant for answering the question. So maybe I'll pick title, maybe the body of the issue, the URL, so we can put some links back, and then maybe the state to check whether it's open or closed, which might, suggest something different in terms of response, whether, hey, here's where you can go figure out how to resolve it, or here is an open issue that still needs to be fixed. I also can go and configure and say, actually, there's some extra stuff in here, like maybe the object RID that I don't actually need. So I'm going to change this instruction from responding by using the tool to saying, consider the below issues when looking for duplicates. And then I'm going to say, return the duplicate issues in your answer. So this could work, but I also have a suggestion by AIP here, which is switching to that single completion mode. So right now we're using this process where we ask for the LLM to determine whether it should execute some tools or whether it should generate a final answer. I'm going to switch that over to this single completion mode because we don't really need that in this case. Because we're providing all of the context to the model, we can just go ahead and ask it to generate an answer directly. So once we have this, I'm going to go ahead and rerun that, and we'll see what we get. So in this case, it's done that first group of finding the relevant issues. Then it's taken that and passed it into the model. But we see a little bit of a challenge here where it's passing it in a pretty messy way. We have some markdown formatting that we're using for this because structure is really important when giving instructions to these models. So having as much clarity as possible helps quite a bit in the quality of output. But what I'm seeing here is this is using our default formatter. And so we're getting this as CSV, and it's pretty difficult to read. Even me as a human looking through this now, it's kind of difficult to say, is this part of the instructions or is this part of the details that we are passing for this specific issue? Luckily, the model does seem like it's figured out some part of it, but this is a pretty messy answer. And I can use our markdown preview to see what it looks like rendered, but it's still pretty messy. And so we have started to find the right thing, which is it's returning the right issue as the first result. But I think we can do a bit of a better job to see if we can provide the model with an easier format to get a better response out. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to do a little bit of formatting on these issues before passing it into the model. So we can continue using more of these transforms that are built into AIP logic. And if you've used Pipeline Builder, these transforms might look familiar, where we have several of the transforms that exist in Pipeline Builder available in Logic as well. So in this case, I'm going to use a transform to format my objects. And I'm going to take in those relevant issues, and I don't need that object RID, and I'm going to format it in an XML-like structure. And this is because it might be a little bit easier to have that markdown embedded in an XML-like structure, because we'll have these starting and ending tags that show where the issue starts and ends. So in this case, maybe I'll format it something like issue and /issue. And I can reference properties on this object set as I go. So I can say, all right, great, I want to reference this as the body in the middle of these tags. And then I want to specify a couple more details just as properties on this tag. So maybe something like the URL, and I'll put those in quotes. So maybe I'll use the URL here, and maybe the state. So let's pass that in. Great. And maybe finally the title. So pass in a couple of things that will help us format this in a way that's a little bit easier for the model to process. So let's see what we get with these. So I'm going to run just these blocks, and we'll see that what we get out is this formatted structure that has these issue tags that have opens and then corresponding closes. So it's a little bit easier for the model to identify, okay, all of this stuff in the middle, everything from here till here, is actually inside of this issue tag. So this is a body of this issue that has this URL, this state, this title. This is especially relevant as the complexity of these, the inputs you're passing to your model goes up. So now, instead of passing these relevant issues, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in those formatted relevant issues. And I'm going to go ahead and run this again. And so now we can see after going through this run, what kind of output we get. All right, so I'm going to actually toggle on the diff view that we have here to quickly see the changes. And I can see, even though the content is similar, it's done a better job of formatting the details here. It has a little bit more of an understanding of what the title is, what the description is, and so once I go and look at this in Markdown format, it's a little bit easier to read. And what I can do is I can do some more prompt engineering here. Maybe I'll ask for it to use links or other things like that. But this is a good baseline because we've provided the model with the context in a way where it's understandable and easy for it to interpret, and grouped in a neat way so that it doesn't conflict with our instructions, and the model is able to operate on it. Great. So from here, I can also go ahead and rerun our evaluations before merging this branch. We've made a couple of changes, and I might want to now go ahead and save it and merge it in. So I can run this evaluation suite to see how has this changed between these runs. So when I run it, it will go ahead and take all of my test cases. In this case, I just have one test case. It will go ahead and run those, and we'll see some interesting things. So if I flip through here, I can say in our old run, we were running at about 5.5 seconds. And now we flipped to running at about 2.3 seconds. And I can click over to our metrics dashboard to see this a little bit easier. Instead of needing to flip back and forth, I can actually pick a baseline run and a comparison run. So I can go in and say, all right, our baseline is that run we just did, and our comparison was that last run. Our last run had an average duration of 5.5 seconds, whereas now we're doing it in about 2.3 seconds. So we've sped up by a bit more than 100%. And we can see a couple of other built-in metrics like compute cost and things like that, see our individual test cases, click into those test cases and see exactly what we're passing back and forth between the models, see all of those intermediate details that are going through, see the comparison between them, and then use that information to decide, okay, is this behaving the way that I expect? Should I be changing how this is what context I'm giving, or the tools that I'm using, or should I go in and define a little bit more criteria for evaluation here? So instead of manually inspecting each of these test cases, I can start defining automatic evaluations. So for this first test case, maybe I want to give it a bit of a better name, but I can also choose to add other parameters. Maybe I want to give it something like an expected object to match. And I can use several of these evaluation functions, either some of the ones that are built in, things like matching objects, checking if strings are contained, things like that, or some of our graders that we've bundled up for easy installation, things like this rubric grader, where I can specify a criteria of exactly what I'm looking for, and then let an LLM evaluate using that criteria. So this lets me build confidence that the changes that I've just made are actually behaving in the way that we expect. And so by doing that, I can have confidence that once I merge this, it will continue working in production. And so once I do that, I can go ahead and start consuming it in all the places that functions can be consumed, because this will publish just as any old other function. So I can go and use this in a workshop application. Let's say I want to build an issue deduplication mini application. I can put that together in a couple minutes. I can go ahead and use that in my own application. So I can open the developer console and call this from, say, my own internal ticket triage system. Maybe I have a handy command line helper that I use, or I can go and create an automation. Maybe I want to create an automation that every time a new GitHub issue is created, I can automatically comment using this new logic that we've created. So there's a lot of different ways of taking this once you've built it and applying it either within the platform or outside of the platform. You can also keep extending this from here. For example, maybe you want to use the new conditional transform to be able to take different actions if an LLM categorizes this as a bug report or a request for support. So let's say if it's a bug report, you do some of the deduplication that we've been doing, and if it's a request for support, you use documentation and you semantic search across that, and then you give it some tools to be able to answer the user's question instead of finding potential duplicate issues. So there's a lot of different ways we can take this and continue from here. So that was just some of the capabilities in AIP to help you get to production. Expect more to come soon, and try them out.